Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. We'll talk with experts on a wide range of topics, including nutrition, stress relief, sleep, mental health, etc.
And we'll dig into the issues that can cause fertility challenges, like PCOS, or early menopause, or cancer treatment.
So if you're curious about your fertility, whether you're ready to start a family,
or you're preserving your options for the future, let's dig in. I'm going to start by reading a text I got from Anne when she was headed on vacation.
Okay.
It says, wow, I just read all of You Are Not Broken on the plane, and I love it. And I love her. So excited we get to talk to her. Going to get copies for a few friends now.
Yay. Thanks for outing me as a fangirl. But I was reading it on the plane because I was like, oh, I'll just get this done so I can enjoy vacation. I was like, oh, it's so good. Wow. So that was my, like, when I land and have Wi-Fi again, I have to order copies for some friends. So
we both blew through it in a couple hours. So
awesome. That was the point. Like, I wanted a book that was very easy to read. I read all the books in like learning about my journey. Some of them are written by PhDs and they didn't make it readable.
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to make this stuff, entertaining and fun and digestible.
Absolutely.
So, nailed it.
Yay! So yes, we are thrilled to have you on here to share just a tiny bit. So as we talk about all this, our next action item for our listeners is to buy the book, because we obviously can't cover everything today, but we're going to just talk about some of the key points that we found from that fertility perspective, kind of the most interesting.
And then let me do a kind of formal introduction for everybody. So we are talking with Dr. Kelly Casperson, who is a board-certified urologist who practiced just north of us in Bellingham. She was a founding member of Pacific Northwest Urology Specialists in Bellingham, Washington, and is an expert on comprehensive urology care, treating all genders for a wide range of conditions. She also specializes in urogynecology and sexual health, which is our topic today. And like Anne said, if you have not listened to our podcast or read her book, the first thing I want to do is just pause right now, go over on your podcast app, hit subscribe, give a 5-star review, come back here. And then actually, before you come back here, go on Amazon or your favorite bookstore or library, and then go buy the book and then come back here.
Oh, that's a lot. That's like the to-do list before sex, which is kind of what we're talking about today. You have all the things to do, and that's why it's hard. So
yeah, let's just hand the reins over to Anne, because I know she's super excited.
I thought it was so interesting in the book, you talking about how you came to specialize in this area. So maybe tell us a little bit about what brought you to this place where you could try and explain all the heavy books to the rest of us.
I was about 7 years into private practice, and, beware of the 7-year itch, right? Whether it's your marriage or your career. You get a little bored, you get kind of good at what you're doing, and you kind of have this existential crisis of like, oh my God, is this what I'm going to do? And right at that time, I think the universe heard my cry for help. And one of my patients came in and I was very bonded with her. So it wasn't just going to be like anybody who came in to change my life. She was telling me about her sexless marriage and how she felt so horrible and low desire. And it was kind of the culmination of everything I got trained or taught in med school and residency of like, women are difficult, they're challenging. I was told to do a fellowship so I didn't have to deal with women. I was told that the gynecologists were taking care of all of it so we didn't have to worry about them. Like all of that came in at the same time. And I was like, is it true? Is it true we're too complicated to figure out? Is it true the gynecologists know all this and I just don't? And because of that patient and like me kind of being like, I don't know. What's the problem? Why can't we help these people? That I just dove deep into female sex med. And I was like, oh, we actually know a lot, but it doesn't percolate into adult sex ed, which is non-existent, Hollywood, which tells us all the myths, let alone monogamous long-term relationships, which really does do a number to newness, novelty, and dopamine. Really, I was like, I got to talk because I can't just sit up here in my clinic seeing 20 people a day and expecting to really change the culture of sex for females.
I loved the quote in your book where you're talking about sex ed, when you said teaching sex ed by saying don't get pregnant or diseases is like telling a chef don't use moldy lettuce, how it's not how you're going to learn to cook well. That is totally what we do. And we see that in the fertility clinic where we have people who are shocked they're not getting pregnant because honestly, their only education was, oh yeah, if you have sex ever, that's what causes pregnancy. So we're doing a lot of that. But even in our clinic, we're not talking nearly enough about that sexual health piece. And I had no idea that you were so close to us and yet doing all this amazing work.
Yeah, totally. It's great.
Yeah, one of our biggest pet peeves, I think, in fertility is that we got this, what you call like the disease and reproductive prevention plan, but like nothing beyond that. So a lot of our patients come to us and are like, why didn't anyone tell me this? And it's super frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, there's the list of things that we were never told, right? Like what happens to our bodies after we have a baby.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever told us any of that. And I'm like, well, maybe they should incorporate that into sex ed of like, hey, getting pregnant can be a challenge for some people. We're never told that in sex ed, right?
No.
And so then you feel like so isolated, so alone, like you're the only person who has this like massive dysfunction until you realize like, no, it's like 1/3 of couples have trouble conceiving when they want to conceive. Like it's actually quite common.
It is. And especially for our fertility clinic, I think your chapters where you're talking about hormones was so great because we get a lot of that. We get people that are concerned, especially if they've been doing any kind of like home monitoring or salivary testing, like, oh, I think that the problem is I have low this or low that. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how hormones are supposed to fluctuate all throughout the cycle and that balance. And so I think your book did a really great job of not only explaining that, but talking about how that's keyed into sexual feelings at different point in the cycle. What would be the thing that was sort of most surprising for you when you were trying to figure out how do I take all this knowledge and explain it to my patients or my listeners? Like, what did you think was kind of the key thing that you were like, no one knows this and I've got to like get this out there?
Oh man, like so many, right? Like that women don't orgasm from putting a penis in the vagina.
Yeah.
That's like an entire book. That's just like a 1-page book, but like an entire book. Just like you need to know this so you don't feel broken. Like 30% of women will have an orgasm by putting a penis in the vagina. And it's usually because there's some sort of clitoral stimulation. But when you think about sex ed, it's our reproductive organs that are shown on the whatever PowerPoint or whatever kind of lecture you got of like, I remember seeing a uterus and ovaries in my sex ed. It was after surgery training and I operated in the pelvis. A sex therapist came to now we do all these like sexual health things up in my town. And she brings this model of the clitoris in and I'm like, no way,
That's not it. I would have seen that.
I went to medical school. Yeah. How incredibly ignored it is.
Yeah.
That even physicians and surgeons aren't taught about it.
And especially terrifying for surgeons. You're in there like cutting around and not even realizing all the nerves and areas.
Yeah, and I mean, you're lucky, at least in our textbooks, if you got like a little thumbnail picture of like a vulva and like, let alone even a label for the clitoris there.
Yeah.
How about you just describe what a clitoris actually looks like?
Well, the clitoris looks like a wishbone, basically. I mean, it's literally a penis. And I only say that because people are comfortable with what a penis is, but it's like same structure, 2 different labels. You know, they're just rearranged in different parts a little bit. Clitoris in its full glory size is only slightly smaller than your average penis length. It's just mostly on the inside. We just don't get taught that we have arousal structures, we get clitoral erections, we get nighttime clitoral engorgement, just like penises do, because it's the same hardware, just rearranged in different ways. But so many people, again, it goes back to that disease and pregnancy prevention plan of like, sex is putting a penis in a vagina, which is very limiting for our non-heterosexual counterparts because they feel completely left out. Like, what's sex for them? Even in our heterosexual, 50% of the population, the vulva owners, aren't having orgasms by doing what they think sex is. Then they think, well, I just don't like sex. I was like, well, maybe you just don't like the sex you're having.
I loved in your book when you talked about how we should be able to just refer to the other genitalia as the male clitoris instead of having the term of penis. Because you're right, everything gets compared to this like baseline status of how this anatomy compares to what was more well studied and understood in terms of that penis. You wish we had some ability to go back in time. That'd be like a fun dystopian fan fiction to reimagine society if we were more clitoral focused. But
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, and the books on the history of the clitoris, there's a couple of great books on that. But like how it gets lost and discovered and lost and discovered. Like we keep forgetting about it or, you know, ignoring it and then it gets discovered again. And you're like, we don't lose the penis.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of out there.
Right. Right now I'm reading Vagina Obscura by Rachel Gross.
I'm reading Vagina Obscura. I was talking to Ruby about it. Yeah, it's my next one to have. So I'm I just finished the section on the clitoris and now we're moving into the vagina. But yeah, seeing all the history stuff. Oh my gosh.
So good.
Yeah. Well, could you imagine if like a female orgasm or some clitoral orgasm was required for reproduction? Things would be so much different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, originally, not originally, but like the beginning researchers thought that it was, and then they realized it's not. And then the female orgasm kind of got pushed to the wayside because really the reproductive focus of healthcare, not in sexual health or pleasure or bonding or all the other things or desire, right? But really reproduction, the female orgasm isn't necessary, but the male orgasm is.
And I think that's one of the things that we do see a lot in our fertility patients is by the time they come to see us, they have been trying to get pregnant, often by guidelines, 6 months to a year. Often many people have been trying for years. They are even less likely than the typical person to really want to talk about how to improve their sexual health. They're like, how could I, as quickly as possible, get the sperm inside my vagina so I can get pregnant? Like they already are, it's like even more disconnected by any concept of pleasure or connection or do anything with your partner.
No, it's a job.
Yeah, it's really become a job. We were thinking we'd talk in our snack episode a little bit about ways to improve communication with your partner, ways to maybe work towards good sex, but talk a little bit more about, like, in your book, what bad sex is. You've already kind of said that it's accepting that penis and vagina is the only thing, but what are the other key things if we want our listeners to kind of do an eval of their sexual life that they might want to look out for?
I'm never here to tell somebody they're having bad sex. Like, who am I to judge, right? But really what it is when people say, I don't like sex, I don't enjoy sex, it's not that there's something wrong with them, right? It's that they might be having bad sex. Of like, I don't really like movies, and you're just watching horror films the whole time, right? And it's like, well, maybe that's not you. Maybe there's a different movie that you would like better. Are you having sex worth desiring? A lot of times comes up when people are like, I have low desire. And it's like, do you? Or are you not having sex worth desiring in the first place? So I think, bad sex would be certainly putting up with any sort of pain that's unwelcome or unwanted and not dealing with it. So many women have pain with sex and they don't even tell their partner about it or their doctor.
Yeah. And especially in the fertility world, they're like, well, this is what I have to do. Especially, things like endometriosis, it takes, I think, an average of 7 years to be diagnosed. So women are just told a lot that like pain is normal in many ways.
I mean, even think of the things that are in the ether of like the first time you have sex, it's going to hurt. Like we literally set women up for the expectation of pain when we teach them things like that. Instead of like, let's talk about sex in a way where we can possibly not have pain the first time, which is just a much more caring, loving way to think about how your body's treated.
And relationships.
Yeah. I think bad sex is, any of that, like, again, going into the fertility, there's seasons for everybody's sex life. I didn't get pregnant on the first shot either when I wanted to have kids, right? So it really does become like timing. Hey, it's Tuesday. Hey, I'm mid-cycle. Like it really does become a job. But I would say long-term, carrying that into your whole life, if it becomes duty sex or you're having sex for somebody else, it's not about you. It's not about the couple. That would creep into the bad sex territory.
And so if someone... And I know it can be so hard to sort out for a fertility patient because they feel like, well, I'll deal with that later. Once I have the baby and then I'm not stressed out about that, then I'll just feel more into sex. But that's probably less likely if you're thinking about how busy and challenging your life is going to be with those demands. So like, how do you even have people feel like they can take the mental space to think about improving their sex life? I mean, how do you tell people the benefit to it?
Yeah. I mean, we live in an overscheduled, overbooked, overbusy, huge checklist society at this point. I just got off a podcast with this amazing sex educator, and she's basically like, pleasure is like the antidote to oppression or you being like run ragged by whatever you're doing in society. Of like, this is literally that personal growth opportunity of like, when do you take time for yourself? When do you take time to enjoy the body that you were given? When do you take time to enjoy your partner? And really, you can have all these amazing sexperts be like, orgasm decreases stress. It helps you sleep. It boosts your immune system. We think it's great for your cardiovascular health. Like we have all these good medical reasons to have great sex and orgasm, but I never want it to get into like a shoulding sort of reason. Like 8 fruits and vegetables and 30 minutes of cardiovascular, and don't forget to lift weights and 8 glasses of water. Like it gets into like almost a prescriptive.
Yep. Don't forget your orgasm today.
Don't forget your orgasm because it's good for your heart health. You know, I see that a lot. I see a lot of shaming and shoulding over like use it or lose it. Like you need to have sex because it's good for your pelvis. Of like, you're missing the whole point of what sexuality is. And I'm sorry that we never got taught what it is in the first place, right? Going back to disease and pregnancy prevention plan. Sex is about enjoying the present moment, connecting with somebody, understanding your body, being able to experience the pleasure that your body can give you, right? It's like all those wonderful things that sex is, but you might have never even been told that.
Well, I was reading this book on my way to vacation. And so in your chapter, you talk about like, why is vacation sex better than home sex? It's like, yeah, it's so true. It's like, it's the one time that you aren't quite as overburdened by all those normal daily things. And you feel like you are more just in the moment and able to be that way. And that's why we love vacations in general. But yeah, if you could have a way to have a little bit of that feeling, more frequently with having that connection and having better sex, that gives you, vacations every day if you want them.
Totally. I mean, to me, it's like owning your power and how do you want to live your life, right? And somebody was like, "Oh, I can't have sex because of all these like dirty dishes in the sink." And I'm like, that's really good to know that like you can't choose pleasure and enjoyment and the present moment because of dishes in the sink. Right. And it's almost like an opportunity for a light switch to be like, what am I doing with my life? What am I choosing to say yes to? And what am I choosing to say no to?
I really can't enjoy it with dishes in the sink. that is me. That right? Is like, I will be annoyed. I was like, ugh, why? Because I have to do them
that's
later,
your work.
So, yeah.
On your deathbed, do you wish that you would have done all the dishes and not had sex? Like
maybe.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's true.
Well, it's the should list, right? It's like, I should be doing the dishes. I should be doing laundry. I should be preparing for whatever I have to do tomorrow. Like, it becomes a list. And usually it's like sex and pleasure and self-care are usually the first things that fall off the list in our busy to-dos.
And I think also it's so much about the relationship of your partner. Not to make it all about me, but like if I have a week that my partner is out of town, I'm not annoyed as much by the to-do list. It's like, okay, yeah, well, I could do the dishes later. It's the fact that when you feel like someone else should be doing more things than you and they're not, that's where those chores, I think, make you feel more resentful, or at least for me, make it harder to feel like you're going to do something that's going to be pleasurable and then you're going to have more stuff later because you wish it had already been done. So I think there's so much tied into all these other aspects that go into a relationship, especially when you've been with someone for a while and you fall into patterns.
Yeah, there's this incredible paper called The Heteronormative Theory of Low Desire in Women Partnered with Men.
It's a handful, but yeah.
Now that I've mastered the title of that paper, I like throwing it down. The author is amazing. I did like 2 episodes on my podcast. I interviewed her and I actually read the paper out loud on my podcast because it's exactly what you're talking about. When there's unequal distribution of work inside the home, then stereotypically, the heterosexual female is the one who feels the burden. And now she feels like sex is just another thing to do on top of her already overscheduled life, especially if her partner if they're not perceiving equality or achieving equality in what that burden looks like. And to me, I'm like, that's a fantastic opportunity to be like, honey, I would love to just go have sex with you and feel great. I need X, Y, and Z to be taken care of and I need help. And did you know that there's a paper written about this specifically? So it's not just me and you. This is a very common behavior and consequence in a heterosexual couple.
I feel like we need a good acronym for that. Like how I love saying hysterosalpingogram for HSG. It's like, yeah, we need like a little UR blank, right? Whatever those letters are for heteronormative.
I think this conversation that you're having actually runs very, very deep. And I don't want to blow it over of like, if people think they don't have time for sex because they've got all this stuff that they need to do, like it is a wonderful opportunity to be like, who do you need to ask for help that you're not asking help from? What do you need to say no to so you can have some pleasure and self-care in your life? And as you know, I mean, especially in the infertility world, like stress plays a huge role on our body's ability to conceive. The sex thing is like, I'm noticing I'm very, very stressed because I have this huge to-do list. I'm noticing I'm feeling stressed because like the insight that you can gain from that will pay off in spades.
And seeing it as an opportunity as opposed to just something to be angry about is such a better way of looking at it. Because I feel like And
100%.
we'll get into this in the snack, but it's like, I think it's hard for people to have a conversation because that's putting yourself in kind of a vulnerable place. But you're right. If you approach it as this place where you actually could have benefits for both of you, as opposed to feeling like you were complaining about something. I liked in your book where you were talking about how having good sex and the value that it can add to a relationship. I think you said it's like 15 to 20% value when you have this positive sexual aspect in your life. And that when you are having that bad sex, as you described earlier, in terms of out of obligation, that drains the relationship like 50 to 70% in quality. So it's almost worse if you're going through the motions with sex that's not enjoyable. You think you're maybe doing something to help the relationship, but maybe that's just making things worse because you're not taking those opportunities to improve the way that you run the household and relate to each other.
100%.
It's an opportunity really to look at your whole life, not just your sex life. Sometimes we're just like, oh, this is just another thing that I'm failing at the moment, you know? It's really an opportunity to say like, wait, what am I putting my priorities on? And like you said, can I ask help for? Do I really need to do X, Y, and Z? And just rearrange our priorities.
I think all the time about one of our really early snacks with Jamie, where she was talking about all the balls that you're juggling in your life and having to think about out of these balls, like which balls are glass, like which are the ones that if I drop them, they are going to shatter and I can't pick them up again, and which are like rubber and they're going to bounce and maybe I'll let them bounce away and I'll pick them up later. So although we have a lot of things that we're balancing, really less than we think are those non-negotiables. And so sometimes it is about letting some things go. And I'm not very good at doing that.
Me either. I'm terrible at it.
I was talking with a woman last week. She's working 100 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, well, you're not very good at saying no to things then. And she's like, how did you know that?
You're a mind reader.
Right. I'm like, because I've been doing this for a while at this point. If you don't figure out the skill of saying no to things, your life will not be your own. You will be doing all of these things that you think are essential. And then like things that might be super important to you, like a connection with your partner or physical exercise or whatever it is, are going to fall to the wayside because they're not loud. They're not going to scream for time.
And you're right, especially for our fertility patients, if you think about what your life might be in the future, potentially with a child and commitments, there's just going to be even more things asking you, like once you've got to volunteer at the daycare, the school, the sports, and like it doesn't really get easier. So this is probably the best time it's ever going to be to think about, improving that connection and that relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like there's no there, right? Mm-hmm. There's no like utopian great sex will happen next year. There will be stresses in the relationship. There will be health scares. There will be kids that you're going to be sleepless for, right? Whatever. You might have a parent now. And it's like to use those not as barriers, but to be like, well, the season right now is happening. Okay. What can we do about it? And not wait for like this perfect time, which will probably never come.
And speaking of perfect time, I really enjoyed your chapter 2 on desire. So I want to talk a little bit about those different types of desires. I think that's one of the other challenges is we all think that that's our problem, that we're just like not having those magic moments that we feel in the mood and that should be like in the movies. And how do we get those moments?
Well, Hollywood is fake and porn is fake. So we can start there. That's edited, curated, scripted stuff we're all watching.
I could not stop thinking of Twilight when I was reading that chapter. They're like glaring at each other basically. And you could almost see like the sparkles around.
When I watch it with my kids, they're like, it's too much pining. I was like, I know,
it's
all
so
the
much
pining.
Well, and then we extrapolate that to be like, I should just have that desire all the time. Esther Perel wrote a wonderful book called Mating in Captivity, and basically saying like, if you choose to have a long-term monogamous relationship, your trade-off is that your brain doesn't have novelty. Your brain doesn't have spontaneous desire. It knows all the secrets. And so the brain's like, yeah, okay, it's just like another pair of socks. And it's like our job then is to create the novelty, to have the fun, to do the experiences, to get out of the routine, to keep that novelty going for the brain, if that's what you want. And what that speaks of is spontaneous desire, which again is the Hollywood mythological, I'm always going to be hot for you all the time, no matter what. I want you all the time. And that's like, again, a very heteronormative, patriarchal, male, high testosterone, youthful, non-partnered drive.
Fabio on the cover of the romance novel.
Freud was the one who said that libido is a drive. It's an innate drive.
Of course he did.
Yeah, he's a problem for women. To reproduce our species, yes, we do have to go out and find somebody to have sex with. But for humans, like for you, your drives innately are thirst, hunger, and sleep. If you don't get those, you will die. If you don't reproduce, you're not going to die. So as an individual, it truly isn't always a drive in that basic behavioral thing that Freud said it was, especially when you get out of that novel, I had my kids, maybe my hormones are changing now, maybe I'm 50. Right? Like you don't have that same drive. So responsive desire is, I'm not thinking about sex every day. I'm not thinking about sleeping with my partner or anybody else all day long. Like you don't have that go get 'em drive. But when the opportunity arises, you start doing the touching, the kissing, the things, whatever. You're like, yeah, this is fun. I like it. And you like it during or you like it after. That's responsive desire. And it's Rosemary Basson who came in, who basically said a lot of women's lived experience is the desire can come during or it can come after. Totally normal. But Hollywood's not going to portray that for you. So a lot of times when women say, I don't have desire, I say, well, do you like sex? And if they're like, no, and it's like, okay, well, the sex worth desiring is the problem, not the low desire. Or if they say, yeah, I love sex. Like I totally love doing it. I just forget how good it is. And I don't set aside time for it, but it's great when I have it. Then I'm like, there's nothing, just go prioritize having that great sex. That's totally normal responsive desire. And so there are medications now on the market for low desire in women. 2 medications, one is on demand and one's a nightly pill. They work great in not everybody. We don't know who they're going to work on until we just try them, right? But I always tell, my joke is I never prescribe on the first date of you've got to read the book, you've got to listen to my podcast, you have to understand sexuality before you just get a pill, because it's not a magic pill, right? It's not going to decrease the work inequality between you and your partner. It's not going to do the dishes for you. It's not going to fix all those other things. But it's available, and it's some people, they work great.
What I liked, since Ruby's whole focus is lifestyle medicine, I got to get back to that quote, because when you're talking about all these things, you also have this nice chapter about all those other things that you should be doing that, adequate sleep, eating, earth-based food, avoiding hormone disruptors like a lot of alcohol, caffeine, smoking, stress. All those things are also important in terms of having that sense. But no, I think that's such a great distinction, because you're right. A lot of people, what they miss is that spontaneous desire. And especially if they had it early in the relationship, they think something is wrong there. And I liked in the book where you were talking about if you're aiming for spontaneous desire, you need to change out your partners at least twice a year. And I was like, oh yeah. So if you're trying to be in more.
Oh, I don't actually want to do that.
That would be a lot of work.
You're like, well, that's good to know, right? And do you, by the way, do you actually want to be 19 again? No, I don't.
No.
Okay. So we're just kind of idealizing this past romanticized version of ourselves. And then we're like, okay, no, I'm good. But I think a lot of it is just prioritizing intimacy time. You'll get these discussions between sex experts, and they'll be like, should you schedule sex? Should you not? Blah, blah, blah. By and large, the majority of sex experts say yes, but not in a you should at 2 p.m. have penis and vagina sex. That's not what they're saying. They're saying prioritize time for the possibility of intimacy to happen. Basically like a reconnection time. And go do whatever. Go do massages. Go hold hands. Go for a walk. You reconnect. See what happens. See what comes up. The bed is not going to yell loudly that it misses you. I love analogies that are they make sense, like eating vegetables for me and exercising, right? If I waited for spontaneous desire for either of those things, I would not be as healthy as I am. Once I'm doing it or after I'm doing it, super happy I prioritize time to put vegetables and exercise into my day. And I think of sex just like that.
That's such a good point.
And I have had those few times I'm like, man, I crave some roasted carrots, but that's not that normal. So.
Are they roasted in brown sugar, Anne?
Yeah. And then I could talk about all the carrots.
And somebody else made them for us. So
Yes. Yes. I know. We all need the little Rosie robot from the Jetsons. Do people even know about the Jetsons anymore?
I know what you're talking about.
Yes, because I greatly enjoyed the menopause chapter in the book. So I know what you're talking about. And I wish we could talk to you for hours. So I can't even get into that, but especially for any of our listeners that are more in that menopausal phase, that is a chapter where in my notes I have all these notes and underlined, and then I just wrote I cannot underline entire chapter, and then I just wrote I heart this chapter at the end. I also did have a drink or two on the plane, so by the end we're almost landing, and I was like, this book is life-changing, but I still awesome. Looking at it now, I'm also very in awe of the menopause chapter. So that was the reason I'm going to send it to all my friends. But like we talked about when we did our book reviews on Jen Gunter's books, even people that feel like menopause is really far away, reading and thinking about these ideas, you're going to be so much more prepared when it happens. Just like how you wish people had told you fertility might be a challenge. Like the more you know now about all these things that are going to come up in the lifespan, you're going to be in that prepared, not scared focus that we've been aiming for with this whole podcast.
Yeah, totally. I mean, education's the antidote to fear. You know, I struggled. I was like, do I put this menopause chapter in here or do I not? But it's like, listen, we got crap for sex ed. Yeah. We got crap for menopause.
Even worse for menopause. Yeah.
You drag people in with the sex stuff. Like, hey, don't you want to read about sex? And they're like, okay, also learn about menopause.
Well, yes. Totally. And no one wants to talk about all the sexual changes that happen in menopause or anything else really with menopause. But at least in puberty, you get like, hey, you're going through puberty.
That's right.
And with menopause, it's like, hey, this big scary thing is happening.
Yeah, the NHS over in the UK is way ahead of America in menopause. And they just mandated this year or last year, they just said at age 50, a woman needs to go to her doctor and they need to have a talk about what menopause is. Basically, that's like the gist of it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that is so cool.
That is so cool. You're right. Why don't we do that? Like when people get their first period, it's this big celebrated event and you talk about all these things. And again, a lot of your focus is on contraception, how to avoid pregnancy, but we should have some sort of equivalent, even in the perimenopausal transition. I feel like 50 is a little late, but better than never.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, like the fact that average age is 51, which means 50% happens before. And when you think about like what a menopausal woman looks like in your head, like even I think of like this 70-year-old with all white hair, like that's a menopausal woman. And you're like, no.
You don't think about J-Lo doing the Super Bowl show and like spinning around. And I mean, 50s, yeah.
Or me over here with my hot flashes.
No, I know. I was hanging out with this. Just like tells you, I was hanging out with my dad last week, and I'm like, yeah, it's really warm in here, but maybe it's just like perimenopause. And he looks at me and he's like, what? And I'm like, and so then I just like I'm like, Dad, average age of menopause is 51. Perimenopause is the 10 years leading up. So yes, perimenopause in your 40s. You know, but he's probably thinking like, you know, a 70-year-old is what menopause is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common.
Well, we want to have time for our snack where we're going to fix everything and have everybody have good sex with some tips. But in
15 minutes.
Yeah, in 15 minutes. But any last main concepts for all the great content that's in your book? You've got a nice captive audience of fertility patients.
Sex can be, I think it's the final frontier of personal growth. I say that in like a very, like it took me many years to be like, this is such a complex topic. I hate to use the word juicy, but like it involves like how you were raised, what religion you were raised in, what did your education system tell you, what did your first sexual partner tell you, right? Like all of this stuff plays into what our sexuality is now, our infertility struggles, how hard is it to have a baby, right? Like sex becomes a job. All of that plays into what sex is to us and what it means. And really just starting to see that for ourselves of like, wow, I really am negative about sex. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe sex can feel amazing. What would that be like? What would I have to do? And it's the person you become. It's like becoming fit, right? It's like, there's no like, I'm fit and I never do any work anymore.
Yeah, time to quit the gym. I did
right?
it.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm there. Of like, you know, the person you become in being confident sexually, in understanding your body, in prioritizing time, in prioritizing communication. Like the person you become on this journey, it's so amazing. And there is no there.
The title of this episode is going to be Sex is the Final Frontier. And so you need that on a t-shirt, right? Like right now.
That's awesome.
See, that's perfect. And especially fertility patients, you know, often you feel so out of control. And so you're right. This is something you can do for yourself. You know, don't think about it in terms of whether or not it will lead you to that positive pregnancy test, but it will make you at least feel better about your life. You know, this is something good that you can do for yourself. So definitely tune in to our next episode where we're going to get some actual concrete tips for how to go home tonight and improve things. Or in the morning if that's what your circadian rhythm and sex time is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.